Now, to show a preview of the picked image, we need to handle the event that an image was picked and then store some state so that we can update this UI and show a preview as soon as we have an image. So we need some state here in this component. And therefore we need to use state hook. This would require us to turn this component into a client component, but we already did this here. So no changes are needed. Now here with this state, I then want to manage the picked image. So I'll name this picked image and have a set picked image state updating function. And now we need a second event handler function here that could be called handle image change, which should be triggered whenever this input here has a new value. So whenever the change event on that input is emitted. And therefore we should add the onChange prop here and set handle image change as a value. Now here in handle image change, we'll then automatically get an event object, as you always do for those event handling functions in React. And we can use this event object to get hold of that picked image. We can get hold of that picked file by using event.target.files and then accessing the first file. This files property will exist because the target of this event is this input. And this file input object under the hood will have such a files property. That will be an array of all the files that have been picked, but here it'll only be one file that can be picked, and therefore I'll just access that first file. You could allow the user to pick multiple files by adding the multiple prop here to this file input, but since we don't have that here and don't want it here, it'll only be one file that we can access. Now it's possible that the user actually did not pick a file for some reason, so I'll check if the file is undefined, if we got no file, and in that case I'll just return and not continue. But if we make it past this if check, we know that some file has been selected. Now in order to show it as a preview here, I now want to convert it into a so-called data URL, which is simply a value that can be used as an input for an image element. So that can be used as a source for an image element. And we can generate such a data URL with help of a class built into JavaScript, the file reader class. We can construct such a file reader and then do what its name implies. We can read our file. And we can simply call file reader read as data URL and pass that file to that method. Now this method works in a bit of a strange way because it doesn't actually return anything. Not a promise, not the red file, and it also doesn't take a callback. Instead, we get hold of that data URL that's being generated by assigning a value to the onLoad property of this file reader object. So we store a function as a value in onLoad, and this function will then be triggered by the file reader once this method here, this read as data URL method, is done. But here we then won't get the generated URL as an input. Instead, we can access it by accessing filereader.result. And that will then be that generated URL. And that's what I then want to store in my state. So I will set my picked image to the result of accessing filereader.result inside of this onLoad function. Well, and with that, we can then use this picked image state to show a preview. So down here, in this controls div, I'll add another div with a class name of preview. And in that div, I now want to check if we don't have a picked image, in which case I'll simply output a paragraph where I say no image picked yet, or something like that. But if we do have a picked image, I want to show that image. And for that, I'll use the image component provided by Next. So you should import that from Next image. And then here on that image, I'll set the source to my picked image, so to that data URL, and the alt text to the image selected by the user. And I'll add that fill prop because I don't know the dimensions of that image in advance. And that should then be all. With that, we should have that finished image picker component, and we can now take a look at it. Here in this application, I now got this preview area. And if I now click this button, the file picker opens up. And if I pick an image, I can see that preview here. So that is working. And with that, we're now finally ready to also work on the submission of this form.